Hi again, and today I would like to take good look at gradients in Howler and the various ways that you can implement and execute gradient type of operations in Howler. So let's just dive in. There are some typical ways you would work with gradients in a paint program, which would be, just using a gradient tool to create a basic gradient, and that's fine. That's found under the this fourth option down, fifth option down, the gradient, lens flare, special effects type of tool has all these different options built into it. You can do linear, circular, and other types of things with that, in addition to other effects like lens flares and callouts. But we're largely talking about gradients here. So as we said, you can do this. The problem with that is you get this preset grayscale. But that's not a big problem because you can use any gradient you want here. You can select from a predetermined list, or you can edit your own. So by dropping this down, we can select any gradient we want and use that. But we're not limited to that. We can also edit a gradient. Go to the gradient editor, and we can select. There are like eight a set. These come in sets of eight. So there's an index to which gradient you want to use, and we'll just pick one we want to use. We can edit a new one, or we can use an existing one. Might go ahead and edit a new one. Uh, Go ahead and click on this. Double click on that little entry there, and it lets us pick a color. Various things we can do. If we click on here, that will delete that entry. It's really just that complicated. So that's about all there is to that. Click again and it creates a new entry. You can go in again and change the color of that to a different color, so forth and so on. Alright, you can save these, reverse them, clear them, all that stuff. Use different interpolation modes and all that. Okay, so that's one way you can work with a gradient in Howler. It'd be nice if there was a more hands-on approach to doing that. So we also have the adjustable gradient, which is right next to it. And as you can see, now we can do this basically the same thing, but now we have some interactivity with it. We can use these little knobs and hotspots right directly on the screen instead of going to that gradient editor. So as you can see, I can now interactively create these gradients, move them around, change them, change the colors, change the placement, and all of that. So that's another useful way of working in Howler with gradients. There are, of course, other types of gradients other than linear. There are sweeps and circular gradients and shape gradients, all kinds of things, twirl gradients, uh, all very useful. But that by itself is still pretty limiting, so sometimes it's really useful to be able to work with different shapes. And all you really have to do is create a selection to work with these shapes, and then you can, using the same technique, we can go in and interact with this gradient inside of that selection. Okay, that's great. Very useful actually. But we're not limited to that because shapes in Howler have their own gradients. So let me clear this and I'll explain what I mean. Say we want to create a circular gradient shape. First of all, we make that a filled shape instead of an outline. That's usually just a matter of clicking on the top or the bottom part of this. You can see a little dividing line there, and it shows the top part is an outline, and the bottom part is a filled shape. Or you can just go ahead and click on this filled shape checkbox. Either way, that was really just meant as a shortcut. So by default, we get a colored shape, and it just picks up whatever color we happen to have selected. That's fine. But suppose we want to do something a little more complicated, and we go and we can see that there are some parameters that affect that fill setting, such as dry brush, and I actually will turn that off. And instead of going back to the panel and turning that off manually, there is a shortcut to that. You see a little red icon with an X through it. That's just a quick clear everything icon. It's just, instead of going through that panel and looking for things you want to turn off, just click that out and it turns off everything. for that particular tool. See, it's next to papers, it's next to fill settings. It just turns everything off. All right, quick shortcut. Um, but we'll also go to fill settings, and you can see there's a lot of options for filling these shapes. We have plain color selected currently, and that's what we get. There are other options. We can, of course, use different fill modes with this, like subtractive, and that subtracts the first color from the second, or, multiply, divide screen, that kind of stuff. Not really profoundly complicated. It's a little easier than going to doing that stuff with a layer, because it's like just right there for you. It's there for you. There's some other options here like pattern fill, and if we had a pattern defined or selected, basically a pattern is any image, and it basically makes a custom brush out of it. It's not really complicated, but you can create your own custom brush, or you can select one. That's fine. I'll just pick one that's in here. Say this thing right here, and once we have pattern fill selected, it just automatically uses that as a fill. Okay, that's okay. There's some different warp modes we can use for that. So as you can see, as we create the shape, now that warps into it, and you can see that's useful. But wouldn't it be cool if we could do something other than just a circle? Say we had a lasso tool, and we created a unique shape there, like a peanut or whatever. Well, good. Just go to fill selection, and it warps that shape into the selection. Well, what if we had like a horizontal shape here, and we did that? Click fill selection. There's also a keyboard shortcut for this, by the way. But as you can see, if we're trying to horizontally fill that, it kind of wraps around itself. So it's maybe better to use warp fill vertical instead of horizontal, and that might give us a better result for that particular kind of shape. Okay, that also is very useful. There's also a warp both option, and whatever works out for you is good. So those are a couple of things that you can do with pattern fill, but we're still talking about gradients. So as you see here, there's also a gradient option down here, and you can select a gradient, or you can another thing you do is reverse it, or you can click on that. It brings up the gradient sweep editor. That's a discussion all by itself. Or if you click here, it brings up that gradient selector. From there, you can go to the gradient editor and create your own gradient and that sort of thing as well. So let me clear this, and now if I click on here, first thing I have to do is make sure I have a particular gradient selected. Go to fill selection, and it fills that gradient into that thing. But as you can see, it's not warping into that. So that's really just a quick shortcut to, which would be very similar to using the gradient tool and going here and manually creating that gradient, or using that slightly faster tool and dropping that in as lets you drop in a pre-created gradient. But as I was talking about, there's some other options here. We can use that same warping that we used before with that image map, we can use with a gradient. So if I clicked on fill selection now, you can see it fills vertically. Now I'll do a circular gradient, and it'll let you select a hotspot for that. And that's great. I'm going to reverse this, and you can see how this would be useful for like creating a sort of a highlight effect or something like in a 3D program. Just clicked on the wrong button. Let me start that again. Fill selection. It lets you select the hotspot, and you can see it creates like a little hotspot. That would be great with a circle. And let me clear this selection. Say I created a circle. Oops, I need to be on filled. Make sure that filled shape checkbox is there. Click there, and you can see we can create like a 3D effect almost with that. That's pretty cool. But let's go back to that selection we had earlier, something arbitrary, and we'll select warp selection, and we'll select fill selection. It's also a keyboard shortcut. I believe it's F on the keyboard. I don't remember exactly, but anyways, you can see it fills in that shape using the shape as a target for what that would look like. And we can do the same thing with warp vertical and so on, or warp both. And there you have it. Okay, so those are a few options for working with gradients in Howler. And we could go on with this. Let's clear this selection. Get rid of a few of these things. And let's use instead of a lasso, let's create a curve. Because curves are very fairly powerful in Howler. This is a basic Catmull ROM spline. It's great for certain things, but we might want a better quality spline for this particular option. We use this B-spline option, and as you can see, that creates a little better, higher quality curve for this particular type of thing we're doing, and it creates sort of a cage around the curve. Instead of let you edit on the curve directly, you're editing this cage, and the cage creates the curve. So it's a little different way of working, but it's more a more attractive looking curve in a lot of cases. So we'll use that to create a curve. Just clicking where we want lets us insert new points. Um, and if you right click, that will let you delete points in the curve. So it's just one tool that does pretty much everything. You can also make this open and closed pretty much by clicking in different in an outside area. Or if you click on this first curve, then it will close that in for you. So it's a very easy tool to work with. But that in itself is kind of weird because it doesn't actually fill anything in. Because there are a lot of different ways of using a curve. You can fill it, you can outline it, you can use it as a rotoscoping tool for movie effects. You can use it to create a selection. You can create film effects, artistic effects, all kinds of things you can do with curves. You can animate it and all that stuff. But right now we're just going to fill it. So we'll go ahead and click right here, fill the shape with the current fill settings. And as you can see, that fills in that curve with those settings we have selected here. Now, had we used like a fill pattern, it would have filled in that way. Or had we used a warp both, it would have filled that in, and so on. So that's fairly powerful. Let's go back to the, apologize for the helicopter. Let's go back to the warp warp modes here and fill that in. Click right here, fill. I might mention at this point another way we could have done that is we could create a selection with that. So instead of filling that directly, we could create a selection, do replace, and then go back to one of these tools that have that give you access to that fill selection and just fill that selection in. It's the same thing, but I think it's a little easier to do it. Let me go back to that curve tool to do it directly here instead of going through those two steps. So I'll go ahead and fill that in. And another thing we can do here is outline that. So this will work with whatever tool you happen to have selected, whatever media you happen to have selected. You might want to just for this use a pen. Select a simple pen, a felt pen or something. Click on finish. And there you go. It just creates an outline for that. Or I might want a different or a slightly brighter outline for that. So let's just finish that. And it creates that outline for us. Okay, and then once you've done that, you can, again, here's that shortcut. It just deletes everything you have, all the curve settings you've created. It just gets rid of that curve. And you also see we've created a selection, so we want to also get rid of that. Delete selection, and that gets rid of all that stuff. So that is a quick look at gradients and Howler. There's a lot more that could be done, but I think that gives you the idea of all the entry points into creating gradients in Howler. So thanks for watching, and talk to you later.